Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagra. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, May 13th, 2021. Are we just saying that now? Or I just realized I think we've been going with 2021 as opposed to 2021. A very exciting change. I'm a little bit distracted by events this morning, and that's okay, because that means there's plenty to talk about. Greg Dworkin has been rounding them up since early this morning, and I'm sure he is ready and raring to go. One of the things that has caught my eye this morning, QAnon assassin Marjorie Taylor Greene is on the prowl once again. We'll talk a little bit about what she's up to, but she's back to her old stalking ways. Pretty much, basically, I would say the same stalking that we witnessed in the past. This is the sort of thing that would establish a pattern that we'll be ashamed of later when she actually does shoot somebody. How could we not see it? We, of course, saw a video early on of her pre-congressional days of Marjorie Taylor Greene stalking, what's the name of the activist from Parkland, Marjorie Stone Douglas High School? David, it's coming to me. I don't know, I'll have to look it up. I've already lost track here. But you remember that when he came for a lobbying day on Capitol Hill to discuss the gun issue that obviously concerned him personally, and also as a member of the public. David Hogue, that was it. And thank you, Justice. David Hogue was on his way to Capitol Hill to testify, and she was, by the way, in Washington, D.C. for no particular reason. She was just a random citizen of northwestern Georgia who just happened to find herself camping out in D.C. at the Capitol with a camera crew, waiting to harass teenagers on their way to see members of Congress and lobby them on an issue of importance to them. And you remember that she basically stalked behind him, shouting questions at him and asking him why he was afraid to debate and why he was afraid to defend himself and why he was afraid to defend his position, and filming the whole thing. And later on, we discovered that she also had been filming herself, again as a private citizen, not yet a member of Congress, not yet running for Congress, pushing her way into the offices of Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib in order to challenge them to retake their oaths of office on a Christian Bible, as in her mind was required by the Constitution of the United States, and not the fake, crazy Quran thing that they had used. And she was a security risk well before she was even running for Congress. Now, of course, she's been elected as what amounts to a professional troll, but also, as I've said a number of times, and one day I imagine something will happen and everyone will say, why didn't anybody see it? A QAnon assassin, now stalking Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, more or less on a regular basis, I think. But she has, in the past, during her term in office, more or less limited herself to tweeting accusations that AOC refuses to debate her, or whatever. But yesterday she managed to find her, I guess after a vote on the House floor, followed her off the House floor and down the hallway, shouting after her, hey, Alexandria, why won't you defend your communist socialist positions, and da-da-da-da-da. And AOC walking on her way, trying her best to ignore her, and but Greene following along. And everybody pointing out, this is one of those lunatics who also insists that she's carrying a gun at all times. So that seems like real fun. And I guess this continues until something actually happens. Or I guess until somebody else decides that walking down the halls of Congress and being harassed and harangued by Marjorie Taylor Greene is a place where you need to stand your ground. What if she was in fear for her life? By gum, you never know. I don't advocate it. It's not a good idea, but somebody's going to get that feeling pretty soon. And we're about to have a gunfight in the halls of Congress. And it's tough. Somebody pointing out today the tweet of not productive, not underscore productive, pointing out if someone pulled this in a regular workplace, they'd be escorted out by security. But this is just a normal Wednesday in Congress. And part of the problem is, of course, Congress has a security force that's basically not allowed to touch them when they put up those metal detectors and said everybody's got to go through the metal detectors on their way to the House floor. And members who objected started to try to evade the metal detectors. The police quickly found that they were unsure what their orders were and whether they were able to physically stop members from walking around the metal detectors. And I think they still find that they're not. The solution has been to try to levy fines against them in order to cut down on the number of times and the frequency with which they do it. But police essentially unsure about whether or not they were actually legally empowered to put hands on a member of Congress and stop them from violating this rule. And I don't think that they've cleared it up any either. So that's a fun way to start the day. That actually happened not this morning, but yesterday afternoon, and everybody's just kind of talking about it now because that's what we do in the morning. One of the other things we'll do in the morning is cover the rest of the news. Greg Dworkin is here to do that. Bill in Portland, Maine, there to remind us that one of the things we need to cover is the gas shortage, apparently. I have run into it, and I did learn yesterday, just after the show, that we were all being instructed not to fill plastic bags with gasoline. So I guess as a general service, I'll pass that note on and open things up to Greg, who I'm sure has probably no plastic bags full of gasoline at all anywhere in their house, in your house, in the garage, nothing. Greg, what do you think? Oh, I don't hear you. I guess we're testing a new computer setup, and the answer is so far it hasn't worked. Okay, you want to give? All right, I saw your mute button go on and then off. So the mute button works. We'll try this again. We'll just and then we'll just jump in. All right, Greg, how about this time? You want to try it out? Uh-oh. Yeah, I don't hear you. I bet you're maybe you got an adapter for your microphone that doesn't work. That's too bad. Everything else seems to be working just fine in terms of making nice ringing noises. I saw your mute button go on and then off.
How about now?
There you go. That worked. What was that?
Okay.
Yeah. Just shouting louder?
My sound input to some other program here, so I had to change it back to the microphone.
Yeah, new computer, still working out those kinks, I guess. And
yeah, the monitor came yesterday. And,
good. That's nice.
Changed everything, but so far so good. Everything's working pretty well.
We just needed a second to press a lot of buttons, and really that's kind of an exciting thing.
Yeah, don't try this at home, because when you press buttons, you never know what's going to happen. I happen to have just launched a nuclear strike against Mississippi, which I'm really sorry about, but you know, it happens.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're not saying that we could spare these guys, but it's sad. But, things happen and whatever. I mean, don't try it at home, because we just did and it didn't work.
Right, exactly.
So there you go.
So, there's a whole lot going on, not just Empty Vessel or whatever her name is from Georgia. Right. There was the Andrew Clyde, also from Georgia.
Oh, yeah? Right.
Was part of the hearing that took place when Empty Vessel Chris Miller, who used to be Department of Defense Secretary, came and said everything worked fine, and I had nothing to do whatsoever with our incredible, great response to the January 6th insurrection, because everything was perfect, and why are you even asking me these questions?
Yes.
Which was really an amazing performance. But at that hearing, the Republicans who don't ask questions but just say, this is more of a comment than a question, I have my 2 minutes, so shut up and let me talk, had a number of things to say. One of them was Representative Andrew Clyde, again from Georgia, who said what took place that day was not an insurrection, and it was just a normal day on Capitol Hill.
Yes, as demonstrated by Empty Vessel MT Green just yesterday. See, we confront members with Congress possibly armed to shout in their faces every day.
Yeah, there was an undisciplined mob. There were some rioters, and some who committed acts of vandalism. But let me be clear, there was no insurrection.
Nah.
And to call it an insurrection is a bold-faced lie, he said. Watching TV footage of this, I mean, if you didn't know the TV footage was a video from January the 6th, you would actually think it was a normal tourist visit, he said.
Right.
Which people, posted his comment with the footage, showing police officers getting crushed indoors, et cetera, et cetera. So, crazy stuff. He wasn't the only one. There were a whole bunch of people who said, you're overplaying it. So basically what's happening is that the insurrection is now being labeled as a non-insurrection, but a nothing event, which is the only way you can justify getting rid of Liz Cheney, because you really want to make the whole thing disappear. And this is all in context of Cheney getting her position taken away, which we talked about yesterday and on Monday. But a lot more to say about that.
Right.
Before we get to there, a couple of other things, though, that came up this morning besides empty vessel from Georgia. Several empty vessels from Georgia. Unemployment claims fell last week. Inflation is up a little bit. So there's a little bit of churn in the economic news, which is, of course, you have to remember how Republicans work. Back in the George W. Bush era, if it was good economic news, then the Republicans would say, see, you have to cut taxes. And if it was bad economic news, they'd say, see, you have to cut taxes.
Yeah, I remember
So they were on message no matter what. Democrats try to actually analyze what's going on and then try to figure out what the best thing is to do about it.
That's disarray.
In this particular case, right, what's happening is that there's some support, unemployment supplements, and Republicans immediately assert it's because of the Biden administration, because they're paying people not to work. We have to get rid of that. And as this New York Times report says, and I quote, but economists are skeptical that jobless benefits are playing anything more than a bit part in the pace of the job market's recovery. There's tremendous churn in the labor market, said Gregory Dacko, chief U.S. economist at Oxford Economics. There's still major supply constraints, and unemployment benefits are not the most important one. The virus is. So I would remind people that a lot of the unemployment is women, and part of the reason for that is daycare isn't settled yet. And there's still issues with school, and what do you do with the kids? Although I do note that Randy Weingartner and the AFT have said they're going to make an announcement today that they are supporting full opening of schools, which is all important. But it's all moving pieces, and it doesn't stop Republicans from bullshitting about what's going on, because in their point of view, oh, these are good economic numbers. We don't need unemployment support. Oh, these are bad economic numbers. That's because of unemployment support, so we have to get rid of it. That's their message.
Yes, all right.
And, it's got nothing to do with reality. But again, it has to do with how the media focuses on what Republicans say as if they are good faith players.
Huh.
Right. That's like CNN, which had a commentary about Liz Cheney axed because of a disagreement with Donald Trump.
Oh.
The absolute worst framework. There was a freaking riot, an insurrection. People were killed.
Yes.
This isn't over a disagreement about Donald Trump. It's about the very basis of democracy.
Yeah.
And they define it down to, both sides. One says one thing and the other is trying to kill them. But,
yes.
both sides.
Right. Why not debate with somebody armed and stalking you?
MT Green, stalking Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, had a disagreement about proper behavior.
Why won't AOC debate? That's American.
Well, it's a both sides thing. Well, what was AOC doing that was wrong? Well, she was ignoring MT Green.
That's rude. And
that's rude while she was being stalked.
The aggressor. Yeah, right. And everyone knows that women being stalked are supposed to turn around and smile.
On the other hand, the thing that the press has done remarkably, and we talked about it yesterday, and we'll still talk about it for a couple of days, is that Liz Cheney doesn't have a constituency in the Republican Party. It's not as if the Republican Party can be reformed. There are no never Trump conservatives with a solid minority in the Republican Party who can somehow claw this party back. The party's lost. That is not a battle to fight. What has happened is that the press has completely taken Liz Cheney's side. She's getting tremendous press. She's getting exclusive interviews. As somebody pointed out on Twitter, this is one of those Star Wars thing to Kevin McCarthy, strike me down and you will only make me stronger. So now she's got a national platform to make the case that Kevin McCarthy is a spineless weasel. And if that was his intent, I good for him, but I don't know that that's really going to work out to his benefit. And right now, as I said yesterday, the battle is lost But her first war is keeping Kevin McCarthy from being Speaker, as well as keeping Donald Trump from ever getting anywhere near the White House again, which is going to be easy because he's not going to run. He just likes to say that so that people will pay attention to him.
Yeah.
And again, he likes to hold the Republican Party hostage, but it's not as if he actually wants to do anything because he doesn't know how to do stuff. That would be work, and he doesn't know what work means. So, it's all about, me, and pay attention to me, and I'm going to threaten to leave the party with my followers, which will doom you, and you know it, and I know it, so you better come here and kiss the ring. And what do I want to do? It doesn't matter. I just want you to come here and kiss the ring.
I just want to wet ring.
I have nothing about policy. I have nothing to suggest about actually doing stuff. But the important thing is that you kiss my butt, you kiss my ring, you kiss everything about me. And if you don't, I'm going to ruin your party.
Hug and kiss.
It's a nice party. Too bad if something happened to it.
Yeah. And also, that horse is a junkie.
This is what all that stuff. So the point here is that Liz Cheney is, in fact, she doesn't have to be your favorite hero. You don't have to put her on a pedestal. She has a point to make about the January 6th insurrection, and the Republicans are really upset that she's making that point, which is why they're going all nutso about, nothing really happened, because they're trying to distract from what she's saying, which is everything happened, and it's a big deal, and it's the biggest story in America right now.
Yeah. Well, they're lunatics, and the one who's at least sees this one particular situation clearly. It's good for her attention. I understand she's told people, or people are surmising that she hasn't ruled out a presidential bid. I don't know how far that bid goes, but
Liz Cheney or MT Green?
Liz Cheney, although Green too.
What they should do with Green is Nancy Pelosi should appoint her to a committee. She has nothing to do, so she roams the halls.
Maybe.
Why don't you appoint her ambassador to, somewhere really, really far away?
Maybe a committee of
you
one.
Can't get to from here, and let her go.
And she just, your committee is meeting in room whatever, blah, blah, blah. It's a closet or a storage unit or something like that. Yeah, see if she goes for it. That's her play, as she's free to create all sorts of chaos and weirdness because she's not busy with committee work. Not that she would be busy with it anyway, but
Right.
But frankly, it's better to leave her off.
I think the Republican Party's lost. I think that Liz Cheney's lost this fight. That to me isn't the point.
But she's going to run anyway.
People pointing at, well, you liberals think that somehow or other there's a faction in the Republican Party that she somehow represents. And no, what she represents is the beginning of people saying, you know what, this is not a party that I can be a part of, and I will leave it. And I'm not going to reform it. And it doesn't have to be more than the 5% of America that is represented by never Trump Republicans. That 5%, if it leaves the Republican Party and doesn't vote for it, is enough for the Republican Party to lose. Not every place. There'll be places like Madison Cawthorn's district and MT Green's district, Steve King's old district, where Republicans will be reelected anyway. But across the board. And I'm not I understand that it's an uphill battle, but I am not of the school that says the House is already lost. I don't believe that.
Okay.
I think that there's a lot going on, and there's a long time between now and the next election. And I fully remember what happened. Was it 2010 or whatever the year was when Republicans ran all of the crazy people and wound up losing when it was expected they were going to win. They couldn't beat Claire McCaskill, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of stuff can happen. Here's a Texas Republican named Jason Villalba. Interestingly enough, I found a 2012 Dallas Magazine, D-Magazine piece on him. Is Jason Villalba the future of the Texas GOP? Meet the only political candidate that Mitt Romney has endorsed. Written October 2012. Turned out he went on to win and play a role in the Texas legislature. And he writes yesterday, I've been a Republican all my life. I served in the ultra-conservative Texas Ledge for 3 terms representing Dallas as a Republican. After today, I'm an independent. I hope to rejoin the party someday, but I will not do so until all vestiges of Trumpism are eliminated. How many of them are there that are like him? That's who Liz Cheney's playing to. And if that's the kind of reaction she gets with even 5%, that's a big deal. So again, I'm not just so willing to write it off and saying, well, everybody knows she doesn't really represent anybody. Good. You think that. And let's see what happens when people actually come out to vote.
All right. That's the assignment. Think that.
Think that. Meanwhile, New York Times, a perpetual motion machine, how disinformation drives voting laws. After former President Donald J. Trump undermined public confidence in elections, Republican lawmakers are defending voting restrictions by citing a lack of public confidence.
Yes, right. The big circle. The big lie.
So, it's the big lie, and so that's why it's a big lie.
Circle lie.
And the New York Times summarizes it up pretty quick. Again, New York Times, political memo. Republicans' overthrow of Liz Cheney risks worsening their headaches. For those of you who don't do this on a regular basis, and for those of you trying this at home, try not to say risks worsening as part of your radio monologue, because it's really difficult.
Risk worsening. Yeah,
yes.
I get the point.
So as the party ties itself ever tighter to Trumpism, some Republicans worry about the implications for 2022 and far beyond. I don't think it's a healthy moment for the party, said one congressman who, of course, wouldn't go on record. The thing is,
of course not.
The party's going to come back strong. I'm going to lead the effort to do it, said Liz Cheney as she stepped into an elevator down to her demise on her way to the meeting that threw her out. But less than an hour later, accompanied by the acclaimed photographer David Hume Kennerly, a family friend, Ms. Cheney returned to her office for an interview with NBC Savannah Guthrie, and a sit-down with Bret Baier of Fox News was to follow, and the message was unmistakable. Her colleagues may have stripped Cheney of her post as chair of the House Republican Conference. That's the number 3 position. She's supposed to be in charge of policy. But they have effectively handed her a new platform and a new role as the leader of the small band of anti-Trump Republicans. So she was asked, are you the leader now? I said, well, I'm going to lead. I'm going to talk. And, we'll see what happens.
Oh, she's free like Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Exactly. By excommunicating Ms. Cheney from her position, Republican lawmakers have created a host of new problems for their party. They've underscored the grip that the increasingly unpopular Mr. Trump retains on their ranks, demoralized Republicans and independents who want to move on, and perhaps more significantly emboldened a household name conservative to take her case against Trumpism far beyond a Capitol conference room. And House Republicans knew what they had done as soon as they emerged from the meeting. It's what it looks like when somebody's running for president. Representative Mike Rogers of Alabama muttered to colleagues as they quickly walked past Ms. Cheney during her remarks in front of the camera. They didn't want to talk to Rogers. They wanted to talk to Cheney is the point here.
Yeah. Because, I don't know. Well, see, there you go. She's running for president.
Other long-serving members were more sobered by the divisions and by the megaphone they just handed Cheney. I don't think it's a healthy moment for the party, said Representative Patrick McHenry of North Carolina, himself a former member of Republican leadership. I think it enhanced Liz's stature and position in a way that furthers her message, but to the disadvantage of the broader party. And then McCarthy complicated matters because he went to a meeting with Biden and the other 3 big 4 leaders of Congress, majority and minority leader in House and Senate,
right,
and said, I don't think anybody's questioning the legitimacy of the presidential election.
Well,
right at the time that I think it was Lara Trump was going on TV saying, the reason we keep talking about the stolen election is because none of us are moving on from this.
Yes. There was a lot going on simultaneously as he said that, including him sending out his own fundraising email about how corrupt and evil Joe Biden was.
With his socialist agenda, right, which, Biden ignored, and that's fine. Biden knows how to handle that. That's not a big deal. But, McCarthy, again, is screwing himself, and there's a lot of people unhappy with him.
I told him to go
decisions.
do that. Yeah, okay, well, I'm unhappy with his decisions. I hope the rest of his conference is too. He's terrible. I mean, he's certainly the most ineffective
he's not good at his
Republican
job.
leader ever. Certainly that I remember. And there were some terrible ones who were ineffective at getting things done, but were, at least good at making it look like they were leaders or thinkers or something, even though they were thinking all the wrong things. He's outrageous. I can't believe he made it this far.
So this is Amanda Carpenter, Never Trumper, writing in The Bulwark. Bring on the Liz Cheney death match. Cheney's likely ouster will force the conversation about January 6th. And that's the thing that that fellow from Georgia was so upset about and tried to keep saying, oh, it was just a walk in the park. Yes. It was just an average day. Because they know that having Cheney in the spotlight means that why is she in the spotlight? Because she was fired. Why was she fired? Because of what she wants to talk about. What is it that she wants to talk about? January 6th. Yeah. They don't want to talk about January 6th, and she's going to make them talk about January 6th. And that's already happening. And they're pissed about it.
Okay. Well, let them be. I mean, we should continue it, certainly, and we don't need Liz Cheney to do it, but it helps. It helps keep it in the news, and that's fine, and it's worth accepting her assistance on that front. We don't have to agree with her on anything. If she wants to keep it in the news, I'm cool with that.
Amanda Carpenter, again, a conservative you don't necessarily have to agree with all the time, summarizes it in a very simple paragraph. Cheney provides what Trump-resistant Republicans never had before, a galvanizing figure who's a legit rock-ribbed Republican with a live political career. In other words, she's not one of these retired guys who writes op-eds that nobody pays attention to. She does not represent a majority of the party, but neither does she speak only for herself. Her views represent a significant block of voters, you can argue about what significant is, even if it's only 5%, that the GOP must have in order to win future elections. And I think it's closer to 20%. I say that because 80% of Republicans, agree with Donald Trump, but that leaves 20% that don't. 20% is a good chunk. You lose them, you're toast. Now, you're not going to lose them all. But she represents a potential for a bigger deal than, it's just Liz Cheney. So don't dismiss her quite so quickly.
Oh, all right. I mean, why not?
She's not going to be president. She's not going to win any intra-Republican battle. But again, that's not the point. Just as Donald Trump can threaten to take his ball and go home and take his followers with him, she has a much smaller following, but she could do the same thing.
She's
do just as much harm to the party.
Well, yeah, it is interesting though. Yeah, now is the time, I guess, for us to remember she represents the smallest state in population. So I don't know. Maybe that was the only place that she could.
Well, look what
win.
Trump can do, because he's a guy, so we have to take him seriously. But this lady, what is she going to do?
Yeah, right. Well, that's a problem. But they'll fix it with Elise Stefanik, unless they don't, because that's up in the air now too. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kgrowx@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kgrowx@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the K-Grow in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm still searching around. Somebody did it, and we can't put our finger on it, but somebody mentioned that maybe Elise Stefanik shouldn't just move into Cheney's leadership position by acclamation. Someone will perhaps mount a challenge. As you've mentioned a number of times, there's plenty of conservatives
Chip Roy
there.
comes to mind.
That may be it. Yeah, I don't know. I'm confusing all the C names from Southern super conservative Republicans. Clay, Chip, Trey. Who else have we got? All these names.
According to Forbes, Chip Roy, a member of the right-wing Freedom Caucus, said in a radio interview that Stefanik's past votes against border wall funding and dismantling the Affordable Care Act show she's not in step with the general view of Republicans. And he opposed Electoral College objections despite being a policy conservative, is perfectly positioned to oppose Stefanik, whose embrace of Trump and support for overturning the election belies a relatively moderate voting record. In fact, some other fellow who's a Republican said, look, I got rid of Cheney and voted for Stefanik because she votes more like me anyway, so I'm okay with this.
Oh, well, all right. I guess that'll work out for that person. Well, that's not what the rest
of the Republican conference wanted to hear.
Yeah, I guess not. And you're right. Yeah, Chip Roy. It looks like his name is coming up in my quick search. And in fact, who's this? Henry Rogers, congressional correspondent for the Daily Caller, which is a job that we would like to see eliminated. But so far, he continues to persist. He says two sources tell him, and those sources would talk to him from the Daily Caller, that Chip Roy is considering a bid against Stefanik for that leadership position. So
right, and Kevin McCarthy probably just heard about it through the Daily Caller, so I don't know if that's actually going to happen. Again, this is your expertise, but House minority leaders and speakers have a great deal of sway over their caucus when they really feel like putting pressure on.
Yeah, I mean, he's never exercised that, so I don't know if that system is working for McCarthy, but I guess we'll see.
It's just not a simple thing. You don't say, okay, I'm thinking about doing it, maybe I'll do it. And
Yeah,
Kevin McCarthy will
right.
just have to wait and see what I do. He doesn't have any input into it. No, that's not exactly how it works.
Yeah, I
You
wouldn't
might
be
do it
surprised.
anyway, because Kevin McCarthy is such a weak, spineless, and the word feckless is, when you look at feckless in the dictionary, you see Kevin McCarthy's picture. So,
Even if
it's
there.
possible that he'll do it anyway. But McCarthy will have a few things to say about that.
he's
Anyway,
feckless.
during the break, David
There's
and I
no
were just
facts
talking about
to
the
give.
socialist redistribution system in Ohio.
Yes, right.
Which is also worthy of talking about. They're taking your tax money and they're giving it to people who get vaccinated.
Oh, hey, that's
Teens
good.
are in a lottery to get free tuition at a state college. Does that mean
nice.
the Ohio State?
It's the only one they have got to choose from. I don't know. They've got other state schools, I'm sure.
I know, but the Ohio State is included in that.
I guess so. Right?
I just like saying the Ohio State.
Yeah, right.
That's
saying
its name.
the.
And then if you're an adult, you just get $1 million.
Yeah. Better deal, really, for the adults.
That's what I'm thinking.
But that's a nice one. I like that. That was one of the better uses I've seen of certainly the best example I've seen of a good thing happening when a Republican governor says, I'm going to take federal dollars that were meant for X in my state and actually
do something besides lower taxes.
Right. But this is, I mean, why not? Look, if a free Krispy Kreme donut hasn't moved you to action, perhaps a small step up to $1 million.
Or a Lyft ride with a beer.
Yes, right. Which really.
And I'm thinking, I read that thing. You get $1 million. Why not $1 million and a free ride and a beer?
That's true.
Why not both, as the classic commercial says?
True, also, but then I guess you could probably pay for the ride if you won $1 million. But it's a nice, it's a good diversion. It doesn't cost all that much in the grand scheme of things, and we'll probably get couple thousand people to sign up and get the vaccination. Not the truly hesitant because they're homeschooling and don't care about the scholarship. And $1 million of
it's probably not even
currency.
mentioned on OANN or Fox, so therefore you won't hear about it.
Yeah, maybe not.
And that's important. There's a Natalie Jackson, the pollster from PRRI, who had a nice little sequence of introducing a new poll today. Here's why Republican leadership that's Cheney. They cave to their base rather than stand up to lies.
I see, okay.
PRRI poll asked about the stolen election lie recently in March, and here we take a closer look at the results. The big lie, most Republicans believe the 2020 election was stolen. The thing won, she says. 66 of Republicans think the election was stolen. That may sound like a lot to you, but we're used to 80, 85, 90% of the party agreeing with one thing or another. 66% isn't as high as I thought it was going to be. And that's the other, 33%. That's Liz Cheney's constituency that she's trying to get at.
Maybe.
Thing two,
They're
it
available.
really matters what television source Republicans trust most. Mainstream is broadcast news, public television, local television, and far-right media is OANN, Newsmax, and the like. And yes, that's 96% of the far-righters who think the election was stolen. We don't see that kind of number often in public opinion work. Right? In other words, completely agree that the election was stolen. 74% of far-right news Republicans and 22% mostly agree. Fox News Republicans, instead of 74% completely agree, it's only 46%. Another 40% mostly agree. So it's, Fox News and far-right news are not that far apart, but 96% as opposed to 86% for Fox News. No television news Republican, it's almost evenly split. Mainstream news Republicans, most Republicans don't believe it. And between all Republicans, 38% completely agree, 28% mostly agree, 15% mostly disagree, and 18% completely disagree. So even if you just confine the Liz Cheney group to completely disagree, that's 18% of all Republicans. Again, that's not enough to win any battle with the rest of the party. But take your 18% and go somewhere else, that's going to hurt.
Yes, unless Marjorie Taylor Greene shoots you.
Thing three, because we are PRRI, we note that white evangelical Protestants are the religious group most likely to believe the lie. So, is lying still a sin if you believe it to be true? It's like a Seinfeld question. White evangelical Protestants, 61%, mostly or completely agree that the 2020 election was stolen. whereas a white mainline Protestant, it's 37. Mormon, 46. White Catholic, 35. Hispanic Protestant, 34. Other non-white Protestant, 34. Jewish, 24. Other Christian, 22. Hispanic Catholic, 20. So again, white evangelical Christians are the base of the Republican Party. You can't say that often enough. It helps explain a whole lot about what's going on here. But as Natalie Jackson says, here's a link again for more, including the definition of all the categories on the charts. And that's the important basis for why they're doing what they're doing. It's within their own party, but they're still operating from the point of view in the House, which is not crazy, that the only thing that matters is Republican primaries, because after that you're sort of guaranteed to have your seat. But there's enough swing districts that doesn't necessarily translate to taking the House.
Okay, right.
Now, here's an interesting piece by Jared Yates Sexton, who's a reporter that first came to my attention about the same time that Armando, our friend Armando, started going to Trump rallies.
Yes.
Back in the day when he was first running in 2016, Armando went to one, I think, in Florida.
Yeah.
And reported out as to what it was like. And Jared Yates Sexton did the same and said from the time he came down the escalator at Trump Tower to how the rallies evolved, he started writing about how sinister they were becoming, about how dark, about how angry. And we're basically trying to warn us that, this is proto-fascism and it's coming. Mm-hmm. So he has a piece now in Substack. A train coming into station, the GOP orthodoxy is total allegiance to a lie. Yes. The Republican Party voted Representative Liz Cheney from her position. Again, all of these headlines are about Liz Cheney.
That's pretty good.
So she's, capturing what people want to write about in terms of the Republican Party and using her as an example of it, which is why it's Kevin McCarthy's headache. Voicing his support for the ouster, Senator Lindsey Graham told Fox News host Sean Hannity, "I've always liked Liz, but she's made the determination that the Republican Party can't grow with Donald Trump, and I've determined we can't grow without him." Mm-hmm. Honestly, you can barely get more cynical than that, he writes. Yeah. Graham has disgraced himself in recent years, first decrying Trump as unfit, warning the party would be destroyed, should embrace him before becoming golfing buddies and tirelessly supporting his every destructive whim, and then for a brief moment, following the attempted coup of January 6th, swearing off the relationship before running back in record time. And what we're seeing with the GOP currently is rooted in this cynicism, having shed their espoused principles in favor of the unabashed pursuit of power, which is, of course, what's underlying this. It's all about keeping power for them. They have no interest in governance whatsoever, other than keeping somebody else away from governing. Republicans are engaged in a scorched earth campaign to maintain what power and influence remains, and have calculated that their means of doing so is to fully embrace inhuman hypercapitalism, white supremacist paranoia, and creating a fascistic and violent movement that will dismantle democracy and shared society itself in order to hold on to power. Again, that may sound a little hyperbolic, but this is a guy that's been to those rallies. Mm-hmm. But the disturbing truth is that none of this is unexpected or inexplicable. Though many will shake their heads and struggle to explain these bizarre and troubling events, this is far from an aberration. This is the natural evolution of the Republican Party in American politics. So how do you fix that? Well, here's a suggestion, actually. This is from Nick Friano, Executive Director of Unite America. It's in the Atlantic. Mm-hmm. And his suggestion is get rid of party primaries.
Okay. Maybe.
Substitute jungle primaries plus ranked voting. Do it the way they're going to do it in Alaska. That's given Lisa Murkowski freedom to do what she wants. She's not dependent on the Republican Party to renominate her.
All right. I can see where it might work there. I'm a little wary of it, although I guess pairing it with ranked choice gives me something else to think about.
Under the reform, you got to do them together. Under the reform, rather than both parties holding separate primary elections, all candidates will instead compete in a single nonpartisan primary in which all voters can participate. Then the top four finishers, because this is otherwise known as a Final Four primary. It's not a jungle primary because of the ranked choice. The top four finishers will advance to the general election where voters will have the option to rank them.
Wow. Okay.
Right? So it's different than just jungle primary and then you only get to run against Republican versus Republican. The top four finishers go on, and then when you get to that point, it's ranked voting. So whoever earns a majority of votes wins. If no candidate earns a majority after the first choices are counted, the race is decided by an instant runoff, whereby the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated, and voters who ranked the candidate first have their second place votes counted instead, and so on until a candidate wins more than 50% of the vote. With this reform, Alaska became the first state to combine a nonpartisan primary with ranked choice voting in the general election. So known as Final Four voting, this system has two major advantages. First, by abolishing party primaries, it eliminates elected leaders' fear of being primaried by a small base of voters within their own party.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Second, by abolishing plurality winner elections and the spoiler effect they produce, it levels the playing field for independent and third-party candidates.
Maybe.
The ultimate purpose is not necessarily to change who wins, it's to change what the winners are incentivized to do. Catherine Gehl, Gehl, the founder of the Institute for Political Innovation, explains. She originally proposed the reform in a seminal 2017 Harvard Business School report on political competition that she co-authored with Michael Porter, and their ideas helped shape Alaska's ballot initiative. A growing reform movement is now working to seed and support new campaigns around the country with the aim of replacing partisan primaries as quickly as they were created nearly a century ago. And I have to say, I like this idea better than caucuses.
Yes, that's for sure. Well, anything can replace a caucus and be a step up. It's an interesting thought. I've never been a fan of the jungle primary, but that's because it's always resulted in a top two thing.
Right.
Top four, I mean, it's kind of an arbitrary number, but it's double the number, that's for sure. I don't know if it really gets us anywhere with third parties, but that's their problem.
So here's what the academics say. First, all voters' voices matter in nonpartisan primaries, no matter how red or blue a district could be. This could be one reason more voters participate. In 2020, average congressional turnout in California is 34%, and Washington's 45%. Nonpartisan primaries were much higher than the average 25% turnout rate in partisan primaries.
Yes.
That's partly because of rules, like in New York, where you have to register a year and a half in advance in the old system. And you couldn't even get into your primary because by the time you decided it was interesting, it was too late. You already missed the window for registering. So, the fact that the turnout is low isn't always because a nonpartisan primary attracts more people. It's like the vaccine sitch, which we'll get to, You call it hesitancy. I call it I can't find any place to get one.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not hesitant to participate in a primary. It's just that New York made it impossible for me to do it.
Yeah, that would certainly be one reason. I mean, there definitely is a apathy problem with it too. I don't know any.
Yeah, just like the vaccines. There are people who don't want them, and there are people who maybe, but if it were easy, I'd do it. But you're going to make me, the caucus, of course, is the highlight of that. You're going to make me spend 6 hours in Iowa cold. in order to stand in a corner and argue with my neighbors.
Right.
As opposed to, I'll just drop a ballot here anytime I want.
Yeah, and in any other setting, that's called voter suppression.
Yeah. Second, nonpartisan primaries can advance less polarizing candidates. Here's the key about fixing it. Analyzing congressional voting records from 2003 to 2018, the University of Southern California political scientist Christian Gross found that among newly elected members of Congress, those elected in top two primaries are more than 18 percentage points less extreme than closed primary legislators.
I don't know. I guess I'll have to take their word for it.
Right. Other early research doubts the moderating effect, but reforms take time to make their full impact felt, including shifting who runs and who wins as incumbents retire. And with more time, Alaska's latest iteration of nonpartisan primaries is poised to have an even greater impact than top two systems in place today. Other states, such as Wisconsin, where a bipartisan bill to adopt a system similar to the Alaskan model was recently introduced, may soon follow suit. So everybody should be aware of this because there may be places where it's going to happen besides Alaska, which itself is a fascinating place.
Yeah. I don't know about Wisconsin following them, but it's nice that somebody else introduced it. I think they may have introduced it to see it killed, but okay.
Well, still, so it's all kind of interesting.
Yeah, I'd like to see it, and then we'll have to ask about whether they can use approval voting versus ranked choice voting, where you have an academic fistfight over which one to use, but interesting.
Yeah, interesting, and they're all ideas, and they all ought to be checked out. Mm-hmm. So that's the bulk of what I want to talk about today, but I got some lightning round stuff I want to mention just to make sure we don't forget. Barry Ritholtz points out long overdue. McDonald's is raising wages 10% to find and retain new hires. Low-end wages have lagged for decades. So this whole BS about the reason we can't find workers is because of unemployment insurance. Well, you're only asking the employers. Why don't you ask the employees what they want? Maybe if you pay them a decent wage, more of them will go to work. And again, women will need to find and settle daycare, including school, before they're ready to return to the workforce.
Yeah. I mean, it used to be classic economics, but now something, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to pay people. Right. So
Another thing, and again, this is in your wheelhouse in a different manner if you put on a different hat. Opinion by James Hohmann, who's moved from doing the Power Post 202 to opinion writer, just like Karen Tumulty moved to opinion a year or so ago.
So 703.
But James Hohmann I like a lot. A bankruptcy trial reveals the deep rot within the NRA.
Oh, yeah.
The political graveyard is full of men who thought they were irreplaceable. We may soon learn whether that maxim applies to the man who leads the most powerful lobby in America. For 3 decades, Wayne LaPierre has cashed in on the culture wars. But the bankruptcy judge in Dallas blocked the NRA on Tuesday from declaring Chapter 11 and reincorporating in Texas, ruling LaPierre's petition to do so was not filed in good faith because his real goal is to evade a civil suit by Letitia James in New York. And LaPierre said he fears the dissolution of the NRA and the seizure of assets if the group remains incorporated in New York State. Well, good.
Yeah, I do not fear it. I mean, I think it will happen, but I don't fear it.
Right. LaPierre, 71, says in a characteristically defiant statement that the decision is disappointing but vows the NRA will keep fighting and there's no change in the overall direction of our association, and that's the tell. Some of the conduct that gives the court concern is still ongoing, Judge Harlan Hale wrote. The judge noted that LaPierre continues to make additional financial disclosures about potential conflicts of interest, and there are lingering issues of secrecy and lack of transparency. And the NRA's own lawyer, Greg Garman, acknowledged to Hale during closing arguments that the trial exposed cringeworthy activity by his client, even as he maintained that LaPierre remains an irreplaceable asset who has changed his ways.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, he's the least irreplaceable asset I've ever seen in my life, but okay.
And they, documented, as James Hellman put it, how he milked the job for more. LaPierre's former travel consultant testified LaPierre instructed her to conceal certain destinations for charter flights when invoicing the NRA, including stops in the Bahamas, where he only goes on family trips, and to pick up relatives in Nebraska. The NRA paid thousands for the hair and makeup of LaPierre's wife. The group even picked up the tab for mosquito control at the family's house, claiming the expense was for security purposes.
They could have been Antifa mosquitoes.
Yeah, in addition, LaPierre borrowed, at no cost to himself, a 108-foot yacht named Illusions from a major NRA vendor. He claimed during a deposition he needed the vessel as a security retreat during the summers following massacres in Parkland and Newtown, Connecticut.
Yeah, that was rather amazing. I didn't really understand how that contributed to his security at all. Vulnerable to pirates.
So if you're really curious about his appeal among women, LaPierre might consult a Quinnipiac survey conducted last month, which found that 95% of American women support requiring background checks and 64% favor banning assault weapons. These numbers show the biggest NRA scandal isn't how much money LaPierre wasted. It's how successfully he's been at thwarting reasonable policies. As the judge in Dallas rejected the NRA's petition, he noted the group had 500 employees and 5 million members, and that executives had told their donors the NRA is in its strongest financial condition in years. But people have pointed out that 5 million membership hasn't grown at all. So he's doing all of this, and he's not growing the organization. And that alone may be what actually dooms him, in addition to the judge. So, I thought I'd be remiss in not mentioning that, he's losing.
Yes, it's been exciting to watch, and bankrupting the NRA, well, one, I guess it didn't really happen, at least the way he says, and two, it was difficult to do, but he stuck to it and stole as much as he could for as long as he could.
You got to work at this. It doesn't just happen.
He's not lazy. He just
all right,
likes
and
to
then
relax.
final piece, or pieces, and this is from Daniel Liebman,
that guy.
who notes an MD and an MBA, who noted back in April, and I sent you a picture of this curve. Imagine, the classic distribution curve. It's flat on the ends, and then it has a big hump in the middle, like a snake that swallowed an elephant.
Yes.
The classic curve, okay?
Bell.
And you're looking at a Rogers diffusion of innovation curve.
I am. That's what
The
that
first
is?
tiny tail, 2.5%, are the innovators. They're the people that invent this stuff and then share it with their friends.
Okay.
The next group, as the curve starts to go up, is the 13.5% of early adopters.
Okay.
Then comes the big chunk, the early majority and the late majority, split evenly, and they're at the top of the curve. Early majority on the way up, 34% as that curve hits peak and then starts to drop. The late majority is another 34%.
The standard deviation people.
And then finally at the end,
Mm-hmm.
the long tail is the laggards.
That's
16%, 1/6. Those laggards in vaccine terms represent the people who say, I'm never going to get a shot.
Oh, that's not me.
Okay. But the early adopters, the innovators, the early majority, even the late majority, that's the vast bulk of the curve. Those are the people who are okay with getting a vaccine. Some people will do it early. Some people will do it when they get around to it. I'll see this movie in the theater when it opens. I'll see the movie on Netflix when I have time.
I will get the vaccine.
Back in April, when he posted this curve, he said, this is what the vaccine curve looks like. You know what's going to happen. Don't worry about, oh, my goodness, numbers are dropping. They're supposed to. Once you get into the late majority, the numbers drop.
Well,
it's automatic. It's going to happen, right? Don't be freaked out by it.
Yeah, and don't export all my vaccine just because I'm a late standard deviant.
You're late deviant. You're a late majority deviant.
Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah,
so Ed O'Keefe, same day, April 25th, posted new from CBS News, 6 in 10 Americans say they'll get vaccinated, and that leaves 4 in 10 who say maybe, 18%, or no outright, 22%. That no outright, 22%, is very similar to the 16% laggards, and that 16% laggards are very similar to the 15% of I'll never do it in the more accurate, in my view, Kaiser Foundation polls, which have been tracking this forever.
Okay. So
let's fast forward to today. New Weekly Economist YouGov National Poll shows vaccine reluctance hitting another new low. 69% of adults say they've been at least partially vaccinated or plan to get vaccinated soon.
Nice.
Up from 60 in April.
Yes.
17% say they will not get vaccinated. That's still the same 15, 17, between 15 and 20% are the refuseniks, the laggards.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. It's not, if you get the 80%, then the 15 to 70% can do whatever they want.
Yeah, maybe.
And only 14% say they're unsure. Those are still gettable people.
I think
but
so.
69% you already got. Okay, so the vaccine uptake is rising for Republicans and independents. 61% of Republicans say they have been or will get jabbed. 52% of independents and 87% of Democrats say the same. So in this particular survey, there are more Republicans than independents who say they're going to.
Okay.
Reluctance is down at 26%. That's down 11 points over the last month.
That's good.
All right. So things are moving in the right direction. It just takes more work to do it. That's why you got to do your boutique stuff. Close down the mass vax sites and start doing, as we talked on the show yesterday, an app where you Uber or Lyft your vaccine and they come and they give it to you and it's delivered by either drone or Amazon. I mean, that's the kind of thinking you have to have in terms of how this is done. Yeah. And if you want to do $1 million lottery and enter my name, that's fine.
I like that one. That's a good one too. And I mean, I think even the laggards and refuseniks some of them are gettable and probably along a similar curve. If you just take that 16 to 20% that have said no to this point and ask again, you'll probably get a similar thing. A couple of early takers and then a glut of people who say, fine, what the hell, and then some more refusers after that.
Right. And then I'm going to finish with a piece from last week by Harry Enton, Why Politicians Won't Reach the Vaccine Hesitant. And the answer is very simple. It overlaps with people who never vote.
Yeah.
These are not politicians. These are like, leave me alone. I don't pay attention to the news. I don't pay attention to politics. We can have the biggest vote, get out the vote in a presidential election in decades, and that still leaves 40% who didn't vote at all. Yeah. And that's us. Oh. And we're the vaccine hesitant, and we don't like politicians, and we don't care about politics, so shut up.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, what do you do when it's like... if
they're not big Trump lovers, the look at the data reveals that the vaccine hesitant group are actually likely not to be Republicans. Instead, many of them are people who are detached from the political process, didn't vote for either candidate, And the most recent Kaiser poll helps illustrate the vaccine-hesitant group doesn't really lean Republican. 20% of the group called themselves Republican, 19% independents, and 61% were not Republicans. 41% say they were Democrats.
Okay. Oh. Well, I guess if your vaccine hesitants are, I don't know, a mix of Unabombers and crazy cat ladies.
That's hesitant. Okay.
Okay.
The vaccine-resistant groups, 55%.
Are they hesitant only? Okay.
Yeah. So the Kaiser poll points to a larger problem. There isn't going to be a single ideological message that appeals to a majority of the vaccine-hesitant group. They're of all political stripes. So don't do it through your politician. Do it through your doctor. Do it through your favorite celebrity. This is where celebrity endorsements come in.
You think they're paying attention?
Because they're not the thing to do. They're one of many things to do. And if that's what moves you, fine. If you don't pay attention to politics, but you do sports, get your favorite quarterback or whatever.
What if they pay attention to nothing? They're just weirdos. Like
they're going to be the 15% who just don't get around to it.
All right, so we won't get them. So, all right, if we find some...
Right. And all of this, okay?
Yes.
Get back to, remember, 15 minutes after the Johnson & Johnson pause, we were told by the experts on Twitter, who aren't experts at all, but like to pontificate about these things, that it was a disaster and it would change everything. And in fact, it's changed nothing other than people are pretty hesitant about J&J these days, which is too bad because it's a good vaccine and one and done is good for like colleges. We've talked about that a lot. But it hasn't changed the overall picture of how people are about vaccination. Everybody who said it was going to were wrong.
Well, that's good. It hasn't even changed the view of Johnson & Johnson in this house. My son went out and got one on Tuesday. So,
for example,
he sought it out. He said, I'm taking that one. That's the one for me.
Right.
So it works.
So that's the story. And,
okay.
I'll talk to you on Monday after I figure out which buttons to push.
Yeah.
And turn on the mic.
All right, so call early on Monday. We'll figure it out. Thanks very much, Greg. Good luck with the computer over the weekend, and we'll talk to you then.
Okay, take care.
Welcome back now to the Kid Go in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Time for us to figure out the direction we'll take for the rest of the show. And gee whiz, I don't know. I want to get back, I felt like I wanted to spend a full 2 hours on how dangerous Marjorie Taylor Greene actually is, but we won't. I think you got the picture. Speaking of the picture, the photo of the story accompanying the Washington Post's, the Washington Post's reporting on the situation. I don't know if it's the same photo that everybody is using. I saw that The Hill had covered it, and this may be just a stock photo as opposed to a photo of the confrontation taking place. I don't know. Let's see what the Washington Post story on it says. Yeah, this is just stock photo from February 2nd, but, you're not supposed to focus on these things. But I don't know what this thing is that she's wearing, but she looked like she just came running out of the hair salon before they could start putting her color on. She's just wearing a thing that looks like, the smocks that they give you. The whatever, I don't know what you would call them, but to make sure you don't get your clothing or that you would change into if you're getting color done. Apparently, this is not in my wheelhouse necessarily, but I've certainly seen it done. And I don't know, this weird leopard print kind of thing. I don't know. It's kind of bizarre looking, but she's a bizarre lady. The coverage of it from the Post, just so we get a thorough look at what actually happened yesterday as opposed to my recollection and embellishment of what happened. Representative Greene aggressively confronts Representative Ocasio-Cortez, causing New York Congresswoman to raise security concerns. Those are the same security concerns that I have, although I express them in perhaps more strident terms. I think she's there less as a member of Congress and more to use the cover of pretending to be a member of Congress, even with no committee assignments, to harass, if not actually outright assassinate people. And I think so, and I'm serious about it, because she was such a QAnon adherent. I don't know how you get to be as crazy as she is, and as strident and aggressive as she is, and as, big of a gun lover as she is, and arrive in Congress thoroughly convinced that you might have to hide the fact that you're thoroughly convinced that many of your, if not all of your Democratic colleagues are, in fact, vampire pedophiles. If you're her kind of person and you believe that theory, I don't know how you stand idly by without attempting to set something up She may have just one foot just enough over into reality territory to know that you can't just walk up and shoot them and then expect to get away with it. You have to create a situation in which it becomes tenable to pull a gun and shoot them and claim that you were standing your ground or defending America or whatever. And now she's going about the business of attempting to create that situation. Well, anyway, the person who actually did the reporting for the Washington Post is Mariana Sotomayor, and she puts it this way. Republican Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene aggressively confronted Democratic Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on Wednesday and falsely accused her of supporting, quote, terrorists, leading the New York Congresswoman's office to call on leadership to ensure that Congress remains a safe civil place for all members and staff. It's too late on that one. They had a riot not that long ago, led by people in Congress like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert. Now we find out Paul, what's his name? Now I'm blanking on the name of the crazy dentist from Arizona that everybody hates. Gosar, is that right? I'm confusing him with Louis Gohmert, who's also in on the thing, but equally crazy and has a G surname. Now I'm confused. Anyway, that's some accusation, by the way. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who supported the actual terrorists who actually assaulted the Capitol, is accusing AOC of supporting terrorists for, well, who knows what reason. You might think that it was, and you might even be able to get away with saying that it was the case. And she may fall back on this eventually if she feels like she's being called out on it. Well, AOC had some commentary on the now spiraling out of control situation in Israel. And, of course, spoke up for the Palestinians who she sees as being victimized in all this. And many of you agree. And I don't know whether this one I have not paid much attention to, but generally speaking, very poorly treated Palestinians, increasingly poorly treated by the Israeli government. And I mean increasingly, like they were always poorly treated, obviously, by the Israeli government, but now it's just getting ridiculous to the point where I do think that they're losing the PR war on this confrontation and like doing so intentionally. I have some questions about whether or not Netanyahu, well, who knows what he's in control of and what he isn't. But if the current confrontation turns into total international disaster for Israel, he may somehow convince people that, well, by putting him back in charge, we won't have these things happen anymore. To the point where I've got no idea who orders their military to bomb a housing complex, right? So there you go. You got problems. Anyway, separate issue. Can't really spend a great deal of time on that, but I'm wondering whether I thought maybe Greene might fall back on AOC's vocal support for Palestinians here to justify her accusation that she supports terrorists, because there's still a fairly significant faction of Americans who will automatically dismiss all Palestinians as terrorists and therefore possibly agree. But as it turns out, it was just your basic standard Marjorie Taylor Greene crazy accusation of supporting terrorists because she accuses AOC of supporting, and if that's even a thing you can do, Antifa and, of course, Black Lives Matter, which she also brands as terrorists. She throws everybody in the same pot here. So that would get her labeled as probably crazy by most people, whereas falling back on the Palestinian thing might save her in the end. Two Washington Post reporters, Mariana Sotomayor points out, witnessed Ocasio-Cortez exit the House chamber late Wednesday afternoon ahead of Greene, who shouted, "Hey, Alexandria," twice in an effort to get her attention. When Ocasio-Cortez did not stop walking, Greene picked up her pace and began shouting at her and asking why she supports Antifa, who they then explain, in case you didn't know, a loosely knit group of far-left activists, which is not even a very good description of who they are. I mean, why not say Antifa, which stands for anti-fascist. Like, that might actually help a little bit. But okay. But then you need to spend half an hour explaining. And by the way, they're not a group and they don't have leaders and yada yada. But also asking her why she supported Antifa and Black Lives Matter. And I think we could probably explain why we support that, but not to you because you don't understand anything. Falsely labeling them both terrorist groups. Green also shouted that Ocasio-Cortez was failing to defend her, quote, radical socialist beliefs by declining to publicly debate the freshman from Georgia. You don't care about the American people, Green shouted. Why do you support terrorists and Antifa? Let's see. This is not video. No one got that on audio anywhere? Ocasio-Cortez did not stop to answer Green, only turning around once and throwing her hands in the air in an exasperated motion. The two reporters were not close enough to hear what the New York Congresswoman said, and her office declined to discuss specific response. Representative Green tried to begin an argument with Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, and when Representative Ocasio-Cortez tried to walk away, Congresswoman Green began screaming and called Representative Ocasio-Cortez a terrorist sympathizer. Ocasio-Cortez spokeswoman Lauren Hitt said in a statement. That you see why they're calling her AOC now. It's just a hell of a lot easier. But you can't do that in an official statement. You could. Start trying it. Anyway, we hope leadership and the Sergeant-at-Arms will take real steps to make Congress a safe, civil place for all members and staff, especially as many offices are discussing reopening. One member has already been forced to relocate her office due to Congresswoman Green's attacks. That's right. Was it Cori Bush who had to relocate? I think they had, I don't know, it may have been her, but I recall the story that there was just some aggressive situation going on in the hallways of the House office building, and this other member opted to move to get away from her. Before walking away, Green said the encounter was intended to hold Democrats accountable for their policy proposals. So why not talk to somebody who's been making more policy proposals? But anyway, so here's her speech to the press. She's a chicken and she doesn't want to debate the Green New Deal, which is a policy proposal, but isn't one that's actually going to get any floor time. She doesn't want to debate, or she would never be accepted into a debate by anybody, really. But she doesn't want to debate the actual policies being proposed. She wants to debate the boogeyman. So this is what she said to a small group of reporters and onlookers near the entrance to the chamber. These members are cowards. They need to defend their legislation to the people. That's pathetic. And everybody knows that the way you defend policy positions to the people is in the hallway outside of the House chamber, right? That's where all the debate goes on. Green has been a controversial figure since her 2020 campaign. I would argue much earlier than that. And Democrats voted to strip her of her committee assignments earlier this year because of extremist statements. Green has made a number of incendiary and false statements in recent years, among them that black people, quote, are held slaves to the Democratic Party, that Representatives Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, the first two Muslim women elected to Congress, represented, quote, an Islamic invasion into our government offices, and that Jewish megadonor George Soros collaborated with Nazis. Oh, and also has lasers based in space that started the forest fires and wildfires that plagued the American Mountain West last year. But whatever. And no mention here of her having harassed Omar and Tlaib and insisting that they retake their oaths of office. I'm surprised that this doesn't get more mention, quite honestly. But, well, I'm no longer surprised. I'm just annoyed. She has also expressed support for the radical ideology of QAnon. At least they mentioned that. A sprawling set of false claims that have coalesced into an extremist ideology that has radicalized its followers, some of who participated in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, and others of whom have showed up with assault rifles at Comet Pizza and bombs, or alleged to have brought bombs to the Hoover Dam and et cetera, and ad infinitum. But again, no mention of any of those things. Her behavior towards Ocasio-Cortez on Wednesday, at least this gets mentioned, good, was similar to her effort to confront young gun control activist David Hogue, who survived the 2018 mass shooting at a Parkland, Florida high school, as he walked around the Capitol grounds amid a lobbying push in 2019 for new gun laws. Green shot cell phone video of that incident. Didn't bother with it this time. And actually probably would have violated House rules if she had tried to record it in the hallway. There's a problem with that. Rules against it were for members of the press to do it anyway. I don't know. Maybe a member of Congress can get away with it. Green has also been an outspoken defender of former President Donald Trump, in case you haven't heard, and his false claims that the 2020 presidential election was stolen. Earlier Wednesday, House Republicans voted to remove Liz Cheney from her leadership position. You know why? This is not the first confrontation Green has had with a Democratic member of Congress that has caused them to raise safety concerns. Earlier this year, Representative Cori Bush, there's the answer, accused Green and her staff, it says for accosting her, but I would imagine of accosting her, in a tunnel beneath a House office building after she asked Green to wear a mask out of concern for the health of my staff, other members of Congress, and their congressional staff. That's a quote from Bush. Green denied the allegation and accused Bush of, quote, lying and leading a, quote, terrorist mob because Bush supported Black Lives Matter. Again, the only one actually, basically caught on camera leading a terrorist mob has been, her. The incident prompted Bush to ask Democratic leadership if she could move her office away from Green at a time when the Georgia congresswoman was already under heavy scrutiny for her rhetoric and behavior. In February, Green also got into a confrontation at the office of a neighboring congresswoman over transgender rights. Yes, that I remember, and I think I confused that incident with Cori Bush's incident as well. I thought that both might have happened to her, but this is in fact Representative Marie Newman, Democrat of Illinois, who hung a transgender pride flag outside her office in honor of her transgender daughter to push back against Green's opposition to legislation that would extend civil rights protections to the LGBTQ community. Green hung up a poster across the hall that said, "There are two genders, male and female. Trust the science." Ironic. Okay. Thought we'd put up ours so Newman can look at it every time she opens her door, she said in a video, because she's that kind of petty person. Representative Sean Casten, also of Illinois, a Democrat, called Green's poster sickening, pathetic, and unimaginably cruel. Green has been a headache for Republican leaders at times, but they have not taken any punitive steps in response to her actions, and they decried Democrats voting to take away her committee assignments. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy spoke to Green before she was removed from her committees and after Republicans started to complain about her attempts to delay routine floor actions, but neither of those conversations resulted in punishment. Past comments from and endorsed by Marjorie Taylor Greene on school shootings, political violence, and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories do not represent the values or beliefs of the House Republican Conference. McCarthy, said in a statement released during the debate over our committee assignments. I made this clear to Marjorie when we met. I also made clear that as a member of Congress, we have responsibility to hold ourselves to a higher standard than how she presented herself as a private citizen. That ain't working. Her past comments now have much greater meaning. Marjorie recognized this in our conversation. I hold her to her word. No, you don't. As well as her actions going forward. So we'll see. That will probably be revealed to be a lie when he does nothing. I mean, very specifically, they hold yourself to a higher standard than how she presented herself as a private citizen. She's actually engaging in exactly the same tactics that she did when she was a private citizen. And so now I guess fair game to ask McCarthy what he's going to do about it. The answer is nothing. Since asking earlier this year to debate Ocasio-Cortez, Greene has confronted her one other time on the House floor when she approached the New York Congresswoman last month to try to schedule a date for a debate over the Green New Deal, a set of environmental policies intended to combat climate change. In a video posted to social media a day later, Greene criticized Ocasio-Cortez for not debating her. If she chickens out, then she shows who she really is. A scared little girl that is pretty stupid and doesn't know anything about the economy or economics, Green said, sounding super smart when she said it. So there you go. That's what she's up to. And eventually she's going to pull a pistol on her and try to corner her and have a quote-unquote debate, and we'll all say, I don't know what to do about that. So there you go. Just keep that in mind. All right. A few other stories to share with you from this morning. Let's see. This is a neat one, sort of. Out in West Virginia, in case you were wondering how things are going out there and how Joe Manchin is doing convincing West Virginia Democrats that he's doing the right thing by distancing himself from Washington Democrats, holding himself out as separate, refusing to budge on the filibuster or various other things. A West Virginia state delegate, that is to say a state legislator, has in fact switched parties from Democrat to Republican, not mentioning Joe Manchin by name in any way, but offering up an excuse that makes me think about what Manchin is up to. Anyway, this was covered in The Hill. Michael Schnell has this story. A member of the West Virginia House of Delegates switched his political affiliation, of all times to do this, on Wednesday, moving across the aisle to join the Republican Party. It's Delegate Mick Bates of Raleigh County, and he announced that he changed his voter registration status from Democrat to Republican and will now caucus with the GOP, GQP, he chose to join, in the West Virginia House of Delegates, growing the party's already existing supermajority. With Bates, I mean, so there's really like no tactical advantage here, but I guess maybe he thinks he'll get some of his bills passed this way. With Bates, Republicans will control the chamber with 78 seats to the Democrats' 22, according to West Virginia Public Broadcasting. And, of course, there was prayer involved. After much prayer and deliberation, I don't know how old he is. During and following the 2021 legislative session, I have made the decision to ensure I best represent the interests of the people of the 30th District, Beckley and Raleigh County, and that I do so as a member of the majority party, Bates wrote in a statement posted by the West Virginia, WVVA. Oh, I see. I guess that's the news outlet that he spoke to, West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Bates went on to say that people people no longer see this is the part that made me think about Manchin. Bates went on to say that people no longer see a difference between West Virginia Democrats and Washington Democrats. He said the Democratic Party at a national level continues to hold positions that alienate and anger rural voters and do not reflect the priorities, values, or beliefs of West Virginians. And I mean, he may be right, in which case probably that signals that Joe Manchin, too, would eventually switch parties. I guess that's always a possibility. But so far he has said he's not interested in doing so. What I'm a little bit more interested in is, I mean, it may have nothing to do with this whatsoever, and Bates is just talking out his ass. He needs some excuse for covering for himself for making this switch. There's a deal has been made, and he didn't want to say, I switched parties to add to an already existing supermajority because somebody promised me that I would get some project for my district if I did, and I believed him, so I did it. Didn't want to say that out loud. So instead he has to say something like, well, people in West Virginia no longer see a difference between West Virginia Democrats and Washington Democrats. And the one person who's like dedicated his career to demonstrating that there is a difference is Joe Manchin. So nice job there, Joe. It's working great. And if Mick Bates is right, they'll just replace you later, and we will have nothing to show for it. If you stick to your guns and protect the filibuster and prevent us from enacting important, necessary reforms only to be replaced later by a Republican, well, I don't know. Nothing. We'll throw up our hands and say, God damn it. But that's, I guess, what you're setting us up for. So what else? At a national level, the controlling interests and leadership of the Democratic Party continue to pursue positions that alienate and anger voters in rural parts of the country and don't reflect the priorities, values, and beliefs of the people of West Virginia. Bates wrote, "This is not changing and appears to be getting worse, not better," he added. Bates noted that there has been a 30% swing in voter registrations in Raleigh County from Democrat to Republican. He quoted former President Reagan, oh boy, writing, "I didn't leave the party left me." Oh, boo-hoo. Anyway, Bates won re-election in West Virginia's 30th District in 2020, beating Republican challenger, oddly enough, Tyler Trump, believe it or not. He defeated a Trump by 4,622 votes to 3,081. Bates secured 60% of the vote, Trump just 40%. During the 2021 legislative session, Bates sometimes voted with the majority party, including on a bill banning transgender girls from playing on sports teams that correspond with their gender identity and a rollback of abortion rights. Sounds like a classic. According to West Virginia Public Broadcasting, in the 2020 election, Raleigh County, which is included in the delegation's 30th district, voted overwhelmingly for former President Trump. 24,673 votes to 7,982, according to the New York Times, in case you were wondering about the place from which he hails. Meanwhile, Joe Manchin himself is, hinting, I guess, at some possibility of, I don't know what, if you would call it compromise, on voter protection. Not ready to sign on to S1, but proposes some smaller bore reforms about which he spoke with ABC News, and it's written up here. Manchin to support measured voting reform. Measured, not wild, crazy, everybody can vote, but measured voting reform in lieu of sweeping Democratic proposal. Subheader reads, he said, election reform should be done in a bipartisan way to regain confidence. That's an old restatement of his old position that doesn't make any particular sense. Let's see if there's anything new here. Manchin is breaking with Democrats and throwing his weight behind a more measured, he says, voting rights bill instead of S1. The Democrat from West Virginia told ABC News exclusively, well, sort of, that he intends to support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, a more narrowly tailored piece of voting rights legislation that he said he believes could muster bipartisan support, even as voting legislation is becoming a flashpoint between the two parties. Now, that's not a terrible thing. In fact, that's kind of a hopeful sign. And a couple of you have said in comments to me that you thought that perhaps the John Lewis Voting Rights Act was the more important of the two. And I did see the other day, and it might be mentioned in here, that Manchin had made mention of his possible support for a bill, I guess, probably, I don't know whether he was speaking specifically of John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which does, I think, do this, or thinking of something else, but that he would support an effort to legislatively reinstate the Voting Rights Act that was gutted by the Supreme Court recently. Though he did say, basically what he was saying was, I support reinstating pre-clearance rules for the Department of Justice to pre-clear all changes to voting related legislation in the states, but that it should apply, I guess, across the board to all 50 states, not just those with whom consent decrees had been reached in the old South, which was the main focus of pre-clearance law before the gutting of the VRA. Let's see if that's discussed here. I believe Democrats and Republicans feel very strongly about protecting the ballot boxes, allowing people to protect the right to vote, making it accessible, making it fair, making it secure. That's not actually true of the Republican Party, but he says he believes it. And the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, if we apply that to all 50 states and territories, it's something that can be done. It should be done. Manchin told ABC News congressional correspondent Rachel Scott. It could be done bipartisan. No, it couldn't. To start getting confidence back in our system. I disagree with you there, but it's a nice thought. Manchin's announcement comes following the contentious markup of the Democrat-led Voting Reform Act, the For the People Act, that deadlocked in the Rules Committee on Tuesday. Democrats have championed that bill as a necessary step to combat state-level changes to voting laws in largely Republican states they say are aimed at oppressing largely minority, poorer, and younger voters. And they are. The For the People Act proposes major election reforms that lower barriers to voting, including automatic voter registration, requiring voter registration the day of an election, and reforms to gerrymandering and campaign finance laws. Republicans have vowed to oppose it, of course. McConnell branded it as one-party takeover of our political system. Manchin said Tuesday's markup made clear to him that the robust Democratic bill, which he's already said he doesn't support, has no hope of mustering the 60 votes it would need to pass, given the filibuster. And guess what? He has no intention of helping them get past it either. But maybe, for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, we'll see. We'll be right back after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And let's see, a couple other items we want to switch over to. Basically, I have skimmed through the rest of what Joe Manchin had to say, and it's basically not new at all. He says he would support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act because it's more narrowly tailored, and that's sort of kind of a worthwhile thing to note, even if it's not necessarily worthwhile to say. But what concerns me is that he continues to insist that he sees a path to passing such a bill, and there really isn't one, and he does nothing to describe the path as he sees it. And then goes on to reiterate his insistence that he would not support using reconciliation to do such a thing, and he would not support a special one-time or any number of times carve-out from filibuster rules to pass such a bill, including the one he supports, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. So, not sure what the path he sees is. He just continues to insist that he thinks that he can get 10 Republicans to vote to approve cloture on the bill so that they could then move forward and have a vote on it. And nobody knows what the hell he's talking about because 0 Republicans have said that they would do that. And in fact, they are dedicated to the proposition that the future survival of the Republican Party, which isn't even a party anymore, but they want to have it survive because I guess it's still got some money in the bank accounts they can drain out before abandoning the whole thing. But their whole strategy is to make sure that it doesn't come up for a vote because then they think they'll lose elections going forward. And they very well may. So they might be right. They're not crazy. They're just a-holes. So they're crazy for other reasons. I mean, they're not crazy for thinking that this would damage them and their electoral prospects. It will. Pardon me. But only because it will allow the majority of people who actually oppose their policies and oppose them at the ballot box to say so. And unfortunately, that's kind of the way it's supposed to work in this country, and that bothers them. All right, moving on to other stories. There's a very interesting development from what? Where did this come out of? Yesterday's hearings. Let me open up Josh Marshall's members only article, which he, because he has shared on Twitter, opens up the paywall, and we get to take a look at what he's musing about. Is the DOJ trying to protect a big lie investigation? And I'm not entirely sure what angle he's coming at this from here. He had tweeted originally, what was the tweet that went along with it? Why did the Biden DOJ tell Jeffrey Rosen not to talk about his January 3rd meeting with Trump. Some fireworks emerging from hearings yesterday, and I can't even, maybe the story will tell me, will remind me where the hearings were being held, but lots of questions about military response to the January 6th insurrection, including testimony from Chris Miller, the then Trump's acting defense secretary, and his storyline, which now has changed a couple of times. And I think AOC was involved in that story too. I did see somebody tweeting yesterday that they were impressed that AOC had gotten Miller to admit that he had given the wrong timeline originally, and maybe even in his revised timeline, he was still wrong. And but lots of questions, of course, from the very beginning about why did it take why the big delay in deploying National Guard troops to back up Capitol Police and provide security, even hours after people knew exactly how serious the situation was. Members of Congress had called and pled for such a deployment. Mike Pence had called the Pentagon himself and tried to reach out to Trump and said, hey, I'm stuck here and they're saying they want to hang me. We need some backup. And, well, I guess those people don't feel the same way about the election or whatever it was that he told Kevin McCarthy and whatever. I can't even get into that aspect of it. But anyway, lots of testimony about that. By the way, still no explanation for why, and no explanation for why they're not changing their explanation either. Why it was, how is it that in the middle of the January 6th insurrection, there was no observation by the White House pool reporters or anybody else of any change in the stance and posture, security posture at the White House in the middle of all this? Just 2 miles away, insurrection seeking to overthrow the government of the United States, but no extra security at the White House, which kind of, it's pretty good circumstantial evidence anyway, tends to indicate that maybe that was because the president himself, who was the final word on whether or not any of that extra measures would be implemented, had no reason, he thought, to worry about his security, even though there was an insurrection going on 2 miles down the road. And that was probably because he was directing in the insurrection and knew with fair certainty, I think, that he would not turn it on himself. And so therefore any recommendations for additional security would be rejected. It's amazing that the White House pool reporters were filing reports at 3 o'clock in the afternoon that everything was busy but calm at the White House and no extraordinary measures were being taken, while the vice president, second in line to succession of the presidency, and the third and fourth in line as well, the Speaker of the House and the President pro tem of the Senate, all feared that their lives might end in this insurrection and called for help, backup from the military. So that was one major topic of conversation. Why was that help not more forthcoming? One topic not discussed, why did nobody seem to need anything at the White House? That situation is only compounded by the fact that emerging in the testimony as well and in the reporting on the situation is that the Pentagon did, in fact, dispatch additional security, but they dispatched them to the homes of top military brass and civilians in the chain of command of the military as well, but not the President of the United States. No extra security for him. Extra security then for military brass, and then for most of the day, no extra security for Congress. It's a little strange. But one of the other stories that didn't get discussed much was that there was a January 3rd meeting, prior, of course, because that's the way time works, to the January 6th insurrection itself, in which the president instructs, what I heard about the January 3rd meeting yesterday was that the president instructs his acting defense secretary that apparently he does want to see the National Guard mobilized and deployed if requested by the local authorities on January 6th. So looking ahead, on January 3rd, he already knows that it's a possibility that they might need the National Guard. But he says that the National Guard apparently should be deployed to protect the people storming the Capitol. I mean, he didn't say, interestingly, I don't think he said at the time, well, they're going to be assaulting the Capitol and trying to overthrow the government, and I want them protected. But he wanted the protesters protected, which is not ordinarily what, presidents do when they deploy troops like that. Sometimes they should, right? I mean, on principle, it would be a nice thing if they actually said, well, the protesters are facing the possibility of attack by counter-protesters, and they have a First Amendment right to assemble and peaceably protest. But, of course, that's not what they were doing. And the National Guard should protect that right. But, of course, in this situation, he knows full well what the people are there going to be doing there on January 6th. He wants that protected. He thought that there should be a National Guard escort for the assault on the Capitol. That seems a little, at odds with responsibilities of the President of the United States. Anyway, but a more minor player in all of this catches Josh Marshall's attention. Why did the Biden DOJ tell Jeffrey Rosen not to talk about this January 3rd meeting? And because he shared it with us, we're able to read this members-only editor's blog entry. One of the hearings today, that'd be yesterday, on Capitol Hill was with former acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen. This was another big lie / January 6th hearing, and Rosen caught a lot of grief for refusing to discuss what happened during his January 3rd meeting with President Trump. Rosen seemed to be hinting at assertions of privilege, but wouldn't quite say why he was refusing. The fact that they didn't, say, well, either say why you're refusing or stop refusing, I don't know. Pretty disappointing. A logical read, Josh continues, is that Rosen, who after all got the acting gig because Trump thought he was reliable, was still covering for Trump. But it's not the only possible explanation, nor the most interesting one. Let's recall that ex-presidents have zero privileges to assert as president. They still have lawyer-client privilege for communications in their personal capacity during their presidency, but they have zero power to assert any of the privileges unique to presidents. The only current president, or rather only the current president, can do that, i.e. Joe Biden. In practice, presidents have long deferred to former presidents in decisions over privilege for a variety of reasons, but it is entirely the current president's call. Rosen has said he was operating under the guidance of the current DOJ. So let's pull that thread and see where it might lead. It's possible that the DOJ directed Rosen to decline to discuss the January 3rd discussion because they have yet to make a decision about whether to reject Trump's expected request to assert a privilege. But there's another possibility. Perhaps they wanted to protect an ongoing investigation. It's an interesting theory. I'll give you another theory just quickly. It may be just that's sort of institutionally what the DOJ does. They see it as their business to protect the privileges of the presidency. And while it might be a good idea politically and for the survival of the country to waive that privilege when it comes to using it to protect Trump and his January 6th plotting, very often White Houses and Justice Departments on principle say we don't want to set the precedent of waiving the assertion of these privileges by former presidents because we'll be former presidents one day. And we want to be able to pressure future White Houses to cover for us. That's a little disappointing as a possibility. But that's not Josh's theory here, but that's as likely as any other, quite honestly. We've seen it done before. But Josh continues with his theory. Remember who was at the January 3rd meeting? Donald Trump, Jeffrey Rosen, White House counsel Pat Cipollone, and in addition to a few other lawyers, Jeffrey Clark. Who's Jeffrey Clark? Well, he was a little-known DOJ lawyer who had, you remember this guy, we read about him, struck up a conversation with Trump during Trump's desperate final attempts to overturn the election and pitched him on an idea. The idea was that Trump would fire Rosen, install Clark as acting attorney general, and Clark would use the power of the DOJ to force Georgia to overturn the result of the state's election. This news was first reported on January 22nd by the New York Times. This was right at the same time Trump was having those calls trying to bully Georgia election officials to, quote, find the votes he needed. Clark's plan would sweep away all that back and forth. I get you. Okay. Sweep away all that back and forth. Vested with the powers of the DOJ, he'd just force them to do it. Now he doesn't have to because Georgia has adopted a new law allowing them to do it, which was the only thing apparently standing in Brian Kemp and Brad Raffensperger's way at the time. Anyway, Trump eventually lost his nerve and dropped the idea because Rosen had already gotten agreement from basically all other top DOJ lawyers that they'd resign en masse if Trump went through with it. A few days later, Justice Department Inspector General Michael Horowitz launched a far-reaching probe into any and all Justice Department employees, past and present, who may have attempted to subvert the 2020 election. It was clear that that investigation was launched in part in response to the Clark revelation, though it was by no means limited to Clark. In any case, it's quite clear that there's at least an active Inspector General's investigation into Clark's activities. That January 3rd meeting is certainly central to such an investigation. And I guess this was a separate meeting from separate from the January 3rd meeting in which they discussed the deployment of the National Guard with Miller. A lot going on January 3rd. Anyway, it would be perfectly logical, Josh continues, for the current DOJ to instruct Rosen not to discuss that meeting with Congress in order to protect that investigation. And indeed, Rosen, while shambling about with other vague excuses, did, I guess it's supposed to be note, it says not, but did note, perhaps, that the Clark gambit is the subject of an ongoing IG probe. In general, Josh says, I don't like the practice of Inspector General or criminal investigations getting in the way of things the Congress or the public needs to know. But that's just me. That is how the Department of Justice works. Did the DOJ instruct Rosen not to discuss the January 3rd meeting because of an ongoing investigation? It is still just Is it still just an Inspector General's investigation? Has it escalated? Who is representing Clark in this probe? Many questions. Okay, that's sort of a weak ending to that, but whatever. He wanted to propose that possibility. And it is a possibility, and it might not be exclusive of the possibility that the DOJ is simply being, as usual, overprotective of the rights of former presidents and the rights of current White House administrations to assert or, I guess, eventually, if it ever happens, waive the privileges for former presidents. But they tend just to be overprotective of those things in general. And as disappointing as it is, it's as likely an explanation as Josh's guess. It's just seen as the institutional role of the White House counsel and the DOJ in general to do that for presidencies in general, even though Donald Trump's presidency is an outlier in all respects. But anyway, let me also add, as long as we're on the subject of legal maneuverings, that the Hill reports. Do I have any other sources on this one? I'm pretty sure that I saw this on Twitter just a few minutes ago, and I was looking for it before. What did I forgot what I had said about it, but was it commenting on the... okay. No, Josh Marshall also covering this, but let's see, what are his sources for it? I see it in the Hill. I see it in Josh Marshall's publication there, grabbing it from somewhere else. Let me just start with TPM, because why not? We're already on it. Christina Cabrera writing up this brief report under the headline, Palm Beach officials preparing for potential Trump indictment. That sounds exciting. What's going on? Law enforcement officials in Palm Beach County, Florida, are reportedly putting together contingency plans in case ex-President Donald Trump, who resides in his Pervalago resort in Palm Beach. What was the name we gave to it again the other day? We had a new name for it. Now I already forget. Okay. Well, at any rate, residing there in Palm Beach. And in case he gets slapped with an indictment by Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance. So, Politico's playbook, I guess that's the origin of this, reports that part of the planning has included discussions on the issue of potentially extraditing Trump if necessary. That causes problems. And actually, we made the call on that quite a while ago about the likelihood of Ron DeSantis refusing to cooperate on such a move. Playbook does note that DeSantis, one of the president's ex-president's top lackeys, has the authority to intervene in interstate extraditions. Vance and his team are currently investigating the Trump Organization for potential financial crimes, possibly including tax, bank, and insurance fraud. All the frauds there. The prosecutor scored a major win for his probe in February when he was able to seize Trump's long-sought-after financial records, including his tax returns. The ex-president has whined that the investigation is a continuation of the greatest political witch hunt in the history of our country. Whatever. Politico playbook, eh? Is there any more? I'd like some juicy details about what they might be thinking of doing, but I bet there's not too much more in there. How to handle thorny extradition issues that could arise if the indictment moves forward. An obscure clause in Florida's statute on interstate extradition gives Ron DeSantis, the governor, the ability to intervene and even investigate whether an indicted person ought to be surrendered to law enforcement officials from another state, which means that as Mar-a-Lago prepares to close down for the season and Trump relocates to Bedminster, New Jersey, is he going to do that? It isn't just the Florida heat he's leaving behind. He could lose a key piece of political protection. That is much more interesting than the question of whether DeSantis would cooperate. The statute leaves room for interpretation that the governor has the power to order a review and potentially not comply with the extradition notice, says Joe Abruzzo, clerk of the Circuit Court of Palm Beach County, the official who would be in charge of opening a potential fugitive at large case. And boy, is he at large. One wrinkle to Abruzzo's potential role in all of this, he is a former close associate of President Joe Biden's younger brother, Frank. Wow. Abruzzo tells Playbook that despite his friendship with the Biden family, the full extent of the law will be followed and carried out appropriately without bias. Okay, hooray. If an indictment comes down while Trump is in Bedminster for the summer, this could all play out very differently. New Jersey's extradition statute is similar to Florida's, giving the governor the power to investigate an out-of-state warrant. But its governor is Democrat Phil Murphy, who is no fan of Trump's and would not likely intervene to stop Trump's extradition. In the event of an indictment, Trump's lawyers could also negotiate a condition of surrender, which could cut local law enforcement out. An attorney for Trump declined to comment. That's probably pretty wise. I don't know why they think this is such an obscure thing that the governors can intervene in interstate extraditions, but I mean, it's not. I didn't read the provision they're talking about. I just kind of worked on the assumption that, states can actually intervene in extradition hearings. Anyway, with Trump settling down in New Jersey for the next few months, I had forgotten all about that, really. Florida is unlikely to have to sort through this anytime soon. It's a great relief, I'm sure, to DeSantis. But the clock is ticking on the Manhattan DA's investigation. On March 12th, Vance said in a statement that he will retire at the end of 2021, and speculation abounds that his office, which is currently investigating whether Trump and his businesses committed all those frauds, right, could issue indictments before passing the case along to his successor. And that means that Palm Beach County may yet have to get involved, depending on whether Trump is indicted, of course, and whether that happens after Mar-a-Lago reopens in the fall. That's very interesting. And so, okay, that's worth considering. And, I guess if you see Trump linger at Mar-a-Lago longer than usual and into the hot summer season where he'll be suffering and sweltering, I guess you know why. That's actually pretty interesting. All right. Let's see, a couple other stories to get to. Here's one worth spending a little bit of time on, and that's all we've got left anyway. The HuffPost has the most comprehensive coverage of it, but I've seen lots of people commenting on it and thinking about what to do about this crazy situation. Former U.S. military leaders sign bizarre open letter pushing election lies. Over 120 retired generals and admirals signed onto a letter falsely claiming the 2020 election was stolen in a move other veterans say erodes democratic norms, because it does. Christopher Matthias wrote this piece up. The piece is illustrated with a picture of retired Admiral John Poindexter, who actually was apparently among the 120 former military leaders to sign on to this letter. So, over 120 of them published a disturbing open letter earlier this week pushing the false conspiracy theory that President Joe Biden stole the election while arguing that he might be mentally unfit for office. On top of it all, the letter, released Monday by a group calling itself Flag Officers for America, but with the number 4, America, because hashtag they're very young or whatever, reads like a screed ripped from former President Donald Trump's now defunct Twitter account, replete with erratic punctuation, far-right talking points, and outright lies about the 2020 election. The letter raised alarm among many current and former military members. This is really, to my mind, a classic, very bad example of the erosion of the civil-military relations in America, which is the bedrock of our democracy. Retired Army Colonel Jeffrey McCausland, a visiting professor at Dickinson College and a national security consultant for CBS, told HuffPost. The letter begins by asserting that our nation is in deep peril and that, quote, we are in a fight for our survival as a constitutional republic like no other time, that does sound like Trump, since our founding in 1776. The 1776 theme again. The conflict is between supporters of socialism and Marxism versus supporters of constitutional freedom and liberty. The nation has arrived at this precipice, the letter argues, because of election fraud. Without fair and honest elections that accurately reflect the, quote, will of the people, quote, will of the people, our constitutional republic is lost, it states, adding that the FBI and Supreme Court must act swiftly when election irregularities are surfaced and not ignore them, as was done in 2020. There is, of course, no evidence of fraud affecting the results of the 2020 election, yet the admirals and generals who signed the letter argue that there need to be more restrictive voting measures to ensure election, quote, election integrity. Such measures, currently being enacted by the Republican state legislatures across the country, seek to make it more difficult for black and brown people to vote. Today, many are calling such common sense controls, quote, racist, in an attempt to avoid having fair and honest elections, the letter states. Using racial terms to suppress proof of eligibility is itself a tyrannical intimidation tactic. A cursory glance at the 124 signatories shows them to be almost uniformly white men who have not served in the military for decades. Most are only 1 or 2-star generals or admirals. It's nice and all. I covered the military for a very long time. The most remarkable thing about this list is how few names I recognize on it, says veteran Washington Post reporter Greg Jaffe on Twitter. According to Politico, the letter was organized by Army Major General Joe Arbuckle, a Trump supporter and Vietnam veteran who retired from the armed forces in 2000 and has since been an active Trump supporter in all sorts of ways. Among its more well-known signatories are retired Army Brigadier General Don Bolduc, a U.S. Senate candidate in New Hampshire, retired Army Lieutenant General William Boykin, a virulent anti-Muslim bigot who now heads up the Anti-LGBTQ Family Research Council, and retired Vice Admiral John Poindexter, best known for being convicted for his role in the Iran-Contra affair as National Security Advisor for President Ronald Reagan. So it's quite the rogues gallery. McCausland, the retired Army colonel and professor, said that although it's not uncommon for retired American military officers to engage in politics, endorsing certain candidates or policies, it's a dangerous development for them to take part in a clearly anti-democratic campaign to overturn the results of a fair election, to attack the legitimacy of a major political party, and to use ad hominem attacks against the current commander-in-chief. to have these 124 retired officers attack the peaceful transfer of power in favor of their preferred candidate sets a dangerous precedent and threatens America's history as one of the world's few democracies in which the military hasn't threatened to take over control of government. Alex McCoy, a former Marine, now political director at Common Defense, says, which is a progressive political action group, by the way, of military veterans, saw the letter as a betrayal. Historically, former members of the military have been either fertile ground for fascist movements, coups, and attacks on democracy, or the backbone of pro-democracy movements like the Civil Rights Movement and the labor movement, upholding the promise of our Constitution against a small group of power-hungry people seeking to divide us and undermine the will of the people. So I guess the worry is, of course, they're going the wrong way on all of this. Anyway, we should take a look at that list. I saw some good suggestions. Howard Dean actually said these guys should lose their pensions. That's certainly a possibility to explore. I don't know how effective we can be with it. Something to think about. But there was another suggestion. I'll bring it back up after this.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to K-Grow in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, well, one of the big landing places for former military are, of course, on the boards of directors of various military contractors. We ought to find out if any of these people are serving on these boards and call into question the continuation of their contracts unless they get rid of these anti-democratic activists. Something to think about. See you tomorrow.